Hello and welcome to Eye of Gnosis Tarot. My name is Ewan and today we are looking at the Ten of Wands. Now some of you may have noticed that my audio quality is a lot better now because I decided to upgrade my mic. So I hope you enjoy the new audio quality, and in the future I may go back when I get a better camera, if I get a better camera, and the more likes I get the better camera I will have. I will go back and re-record some of these Wands videos because the quality is not great, but at least I'm getting the information out there at the moment. Now today is going to be quite a long video because there is a lot to explain here in the Ten of Wands, but I hope you are okay with that and you certainly benefit from it, because it means that when I come onto the other 10 cards in the other suits, it will not be as long as this one. So think of this as a welcome to the number 10, and you'll understand why there's a lot to go through as we go through the card. Now, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon if you want to listen to more videos about the Thoth Tarot, as well as future videos looking at your own readings each month for your sun sign, rising sign and moon sign. And we will also be doing a few tutorials on the actual tarot spreads, like the Celtic Cross, the so-called Temple of Love as I call it, as well as the actual Thoth Tarot spread that Crowley recommends. But without further ado, we're going to get straight into the Ten of Wands because, like I say, it's going to be a long video. Here on the Ten of Wands, we see these 8 flaming wands in the background with a big raging orange background here. The Doges, which we saw in the Two of Wands, have now extended into these 2 iron bars here, and they are caging the inferno behind them. The sign of Saturn looms above, and below we have the sign of Sagittarius. I will just say, if you want to go straight to the Divinatory Interpretations, there is a timestamp below, but I do recommend you listen to the Symbolism and the description first, which we're going to get into now. So, with the Nines Infinitum established, it may appear that the whole of existence is complete. In a sense, it is. However, we must consider, where does completion manifest? Perhaps it was in the previous Sephiroth. And again, we would not be wrong, but totality is not present in any single Sephiroth besides Kether. And the problem with Kether is that it is only the potential of the whole, not its manifestation. So where does everything become realised? Well, in another Kether. Yet this is not a Kether as we know it. Instead, this is a replication, and it is confirming, realising and trapping everything within Kether, and hence the Tree of Life. This is called Malkuth, number 10, and we are all living in it right now. Malkuth is the depository of the Tree of Life, or the Kingdom as it is also known, and the medallion of existence, where consciousness or energy is given form. The Big Bang has happened, and now our universe is born. But there is a problem. Whilst energy, consciousness, has been in difficult places before, it has never found itself trapped within itself. This is called Maya in Vedic traditions. Maya means illusion. However, this doesn't mean that Malkuth isn't real. Rather, the illusion is believing that this arena of consciousness that it created for itself and from itself is all that there is. So, the illusion is that the physical realm is all that there is, when actually we know that there's so much more than that. The evidence is actually found within our own minds, if you're ever wondering what else there is apart from the physical world. Well, have a look at your thoughts. And when we come to the Ten of Swords, we'll know that that is a bit of a double-edged blade. Also, for any of you that have watched The Matrix or have wished to watch The Matrix, I highly recommend that you do. That is an analogy for what we're talking about here. Malkuth is where energy or consciousness deposits every Sephiro, and thus consciousness is the vessel by which everything is deposited into anything. It can also be applied to energy. We're talking about the same thing here, energy and consciousness being the same thing. We see this concept in Murphy's Law. In other words, if something can happen, it eventually will. This creates a chaotic order of liberty, which we experience as cause and effect, and our perception of time and free will. This illusion is not an accident, for it allows consciousness to experience itself fully. Thus, as above, so below. One is reflected in the 10. It is the Alpha and the Omega, and Malkuth becomes the show where Kether forgets itself in infinite roles so that it can experience itself genuinely and perpetually. In short, all the world's a stage. And so that sentence there is essentially talking about how the whole of reality as we experience it here in Malkuth is an arena or a stage that consciousness created for itself to experience itself, and it does that by forgetting it is. Because if you knew what was coming every single time you did something, like Groundhog Day, it'd get boring. And so consciousness chooses to forget itself and be reborn again and again and again as all these people and all these plants and all these animals, every single atom. And that is why when we talk about in perennial philosophy and a lot of this esoteric thing stuff, and also monotheism in general, we talk about how everything is one and there is no duality. And this still applies to animism and paganism. It's just an extension of and a more wise understanding that the one is multifaceted, and we see that all around us. So we're going to look into the symbolism of the Ten of Wands. Again, this can be quite a long section. So the nature of the Ten of Wands is quite evident here in Lady Harris's artwork. The doges that were once charged with energy have now solidified into these long iron bars, holding back the infinite potential of all the Sephiro, represented here by the 8 wands. Do go back and look at that video to understand what I mean by infinite when it comes to 8. The 2 doges are an expression of the maintaining principle. Please do go back and look at the 2 of Wands video, because that takes quite a bit of explanation as to what I mean by that. But anyway, this expression of the maintaining principle of existence is now emanating itself into different forms with respect to what it needs to maintain. In other words, it's meeting the needs of the universe, of itself. In Vedic traditions, we can see this as Vishnu emanating into the form of Brahma, creation. So this is Brahma coming out of Vishnu's Narayana form as this little lotus coming out of his belly, essentially, and that's our universe. And that happened in the 3 of Wands. So do go back and look at that video to understand what I'm talking about. Also emanating as Indra, or the superego, in the 6 of Wands. Go back and look at that video. And finally, manifesting as the Atman, or the self, as well as Mohini, Maya, illusion, and finally the mind, or the ego, within the 10 of Wands. That's here. There's this triple aspect to reality as we experience it, and this is a reflection of the Trinity that we see throughout the Tree of Life and within Vedic and Christian traditions. Now, we have seen the ego, the mind, before in the Sephiro, and this mind-ego aspect within Malkuth, it carries on the maintaining and limiting factors that we saw given birth in the Four of Wands. Do go back again and look at that video. And this maintaining principle within Four is what gave birth to our perception of time. However, time in the Four of Wands is a much greater sense of time, God's time, so to speak. Very different from the way we experience time. The way we experience time is a reflection of that here in the 10. And the way I describe the difference and how they relate to each other is like this. So if you can imagine a line travelling through time and space, that's consciousness. And that's linear. That's God's time. Or consciousness is time. However, we think that's our time when actually the way we are perceiving time is like a circle that is going around that line. It is the actual circumference of the line, and it just keeps, like the Ouroboros. Anyone knows what that is? The Ouroboros eating its own tail. And it just keeps repeating itself. Another one is another analogy I use is a racetrack. So our ego consciousness is perceiving time as the runner on the outside of the track, and then each of the Sephiro are like the other runners as we get closer to the centre. And then finally we have Kether, pure consciousness, is just in the middle of that racing track. And in that sense, it's not limited to our time. Instead, Kether's racetrack is this multiple racetracks stacked on one on each other, and it's the middle bit continuing through them that is actually time. A bit of a complicated explanation, and it's probably easier to draw. This is why we often see time as a wheel. We are essentially that racetrack, and that's what's expressed here in Malkuth. This is the echo of the real time here, Malkuth. Now this time, this illusion of time within Malkuth is here expressed by Saturn, which you see there. Saturn is associated with time. If you look at the 4, 5 and 6 of Wands, we talk about Cronus, who is the Greek Saturn, who represents time, where we get our words like chronology from. And we saw this in the 5 of Wands as well, that Saturn. And the thing is with time, or Saturn, is if he is allowed to rule consciousness, so if that outside runner is keeping all the other runners within the racetrack, it will restrict consciousness. And this is why in previous cards we said that the ego and time are the same thing. It's essentially the rim of consciousness, the Ouroboros holding it all in. And again, why the snake is associated with the ego. And when we get to the Prince of Cups, we'll go a bit deeper into that symbolism. Now, as we've seen, this trap is necessary for consciousness's own self-experience ruse. It's kidding itself on purpose. However, as we also learnt in Chesed, this can become stagnant. Thus, consciousness does have an exit strategy. So even the play, the illusion that consciousness plays on itself, can get boring after a while. And we call this boredom suffering. And this exit strategy is one that allows it to have unlimited experience throughout the Tree of Life, as well as the ultimate experience of returning back to its source. Now you may be asking, what is this exit strategy? So essentially this exit strategy is the path back to Kether through 9, which we saw in the last card. So do go back and look at Yesod, the 9 of Wands, the Strength card, to understand what I mean by that. But in short, if you look at the Tree of Life, which I will actually bring up here now, to a copy of it here. So if we look at the tree of life here, down here at the moment in Malkuth, and the exit strategy is up here through 9 to 6, which is Christ consciousness, and back to Kether. And that's basically, it's had enough. And then when we are suffering, go back up through here, turn back to ourselves. And this is often why when we get to our darkest moments, we tend to have these mystical and religious experiences. And that's what this is, this message up here, the mystical experience. And you come back down again, of course, unless you die. You die, you have a near-death experience, and you actually do die, and then you're going back up there. So, again, this exit strategy is represented, the gateway for it is represented by Yesod, and that is represented here by the sage-like Sagittarius, who is the key to becoming aware of the self. In other words, the superego. And again, we talked about that in the Six of Wands, about how the Jupiter, Zeus, Yahweh, Indra principle, essentially that wise self, that's also very expansive. If you know anything about Greek mythology, you will know that Zeus gets around a bit, and that is not that he's a human being who's a bit loose. It's rather an analogy for how the superego has this expansiveness to it. It can see the bigger picture. And we did see the problems with that in the Eight of Wands, how Sagittarius can sometimes just waffle on, and that's exactly what I'm doing now. I am Sagittarius rising and a Mercury in Sagittarius myself. So I do apologise. But then again, I suppose I wouldn't be doing this video if I wasn't, if I didn't have a Sagittarius rising and Sagittarius Mercury. So carrying on. So when we have this sage-like principle, we see the balance and tension between maintaining an existence for consciousness to experience, yet also usurping it so that different experiences and existences can happen, subverting consciousness's own expectations. This tension is represented in the Ten of Wands by the difficult relationship we see here between Saturn and Sagittarius, because this is essentially the same battle we saw in the Five of Wands and the outcome in the Six of Wands, Jupiter's rebellion against Saturn, as Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So the first concept of time was overthrown in Tippereth, but it has returned in this lesser abstract form that we talked about within the arena of Malkuth, so that it can exist essentially. However, it is also an oppressing energy and oppressing consciousness, which needs to be free and return back to itself. And that's that exit strategy. When we, and this is again why the card is called oppression, because when the play gets a bit much, we've forgotten that it's just a game, it starts to feel painful, in other words suffering, we have this exit strategy consciousness has, and that is the simple exit strategy of returning back to ourselves. And we see this in psychology, turning back to who we really are, such a freeing principle within many mental health problems. Now we're going to go on a bit of a theological side quest here, going into Christianity and relating this Saturnian Jupiterian concept to Christian mythology. Again, this perennial philosophy that most, if not all, wisdom traditions are expressing the same things. So this lesser Saturnian form of maintenance, descending from 4, time, ego, troubling the Jupiterian realm of 6, superego, can be equated to the Gnostic demiurge, which we've talked about before. So the Gnostic demiurge is that time is Saturn, the little god that thinks it is the god. And the Gnostics, essentially, their theology was that the Old Testament God is this little God. It's not the big God, which is Kether. And they believed that Christ was talking about the big God. And that's why we see this big contrast in places between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. Not in all places. We must remember the Old Testament is a collection of books written by different authors. So we might see Christ's God, the Kether, in some of the Psalms, but at the same time we might see this little demiurge God in some of the more visceral parts of the Old Testament. Now, in other Christian traditions, we can interpret this demiurge as the fall and redemption of Lucifer, the redemption part being the Jupiterian aspect. So Lucifer is that fall and represents the first stirrings of both the ego and the superego. We must remember that the ego in this sense comes, the primordial ego, time, comes before the superego, which is outside of time. Cronus is Zeus's father. Satan is Lucifer's manifestation as ego. So this is the 10. This is the this is the time we are experiencing. The ego in a human body, as opposed to this big ego, who is fittingly a reflection of God, and this is why we get duality within a non-dual system. So 10 is essentially a reflection of 1. Satan is a reflection of God, and this is not. I don't want to disturb anyone out there who is a devout Christian. We essentially have to remember that Lucifer means light bearer in Hebrew, and that it is the light of God who shines so brightly that it starts to think that it is God. And again, we talked about this in the Four of Wands, how the demiurge, because it's below the abyss, the metaphysical line between the supernal triad and everything else. It can't see above the abyss, so there's a bit of a sympathy for the devil here, whereby it just doesn't know until there is a way it does know, though. I'm going to talk about that here. And that is the escape. That's how it knows. So the escape we talked about through 9 and 6, back to 1, is the redemption of Satan, going back to its more primordial state. And the primordial state of the 4 is the 3 and the 2. This is the Christ concept. Christ is that 6, Christ consciousness. 9 is the Holy Spirit. So essentially, when we find the Holy Spirit, it takes us to Christ consciousness, and then Christ consciousness takes us back to that supernal triad and the 1, Kether. Because if you remember, talked about in the 2 and 3 of Wands that 1, 2, and 3 kind of coexist as this eternal 1. Hinduism, it's the Brahman. It is eternally Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. It's constantly oscillating. 1 triangle. And also we see how in the book of John, they say that the word was with God from the beginning, that word being Christ. Essentially that's saying that the Son and the Spirit and the Father all live again in this eternal 1 existence. And of course, the Romans, when they converted to Christianity, had a lot of problems with this. How can 3 be 1? Quite simple. Draw a triangle, mate. Okay, so we've done quite a bit there, and we're just going to finish off here with the zodiacal position of the card. So again, I know I keep going over it, but I'm just showing you where you find this everywhere, basically. So here we have, again, Saturn in Sagittarius, and if we look at the Decan wheel, the Decan wheel is the zodiac year, and it has all the tarot cards on it. This card is the card that comes just before the winter solstice, which is very fitting here with the oppression concept. So this oppression is expressed in the zodiacal position of the card, which is in the last decan of Sagittarius, as I've said. And it is the darkest time of the year before the winter solstice ushers in change. When we come to the 2 of discs, we'll see the flip side of this card. I can relate to this quite a bit, these 2 cards, because as I've said, I'm a Sagittarius rising, but I'm also a Capricorn sun. If any of you know anything about astrology, Saturn rules Capricorn. and the Two of Discs is Jupiter. So again, it's kind of the flip side of this card. The Ten of Wands is an overbearing force. It is energy restricted by the product of energy, and thus has lost its true nature, which is to flow. So this is why we call it oppression. Energy, will, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, has limited itself in the maintenance of its experience simulation and quite forgotten the true purpose of its existence. Again, this is done on purpose. I'm going to go into the divinatory interpretations of this card. When well dignified, the card represents learning, sacrifice, and reflection. When ill dignified, the card represents lies, deceit, oppression, of course, slander, envy, pressure, and dogmatism. The key concept here is being held down by a great burden, and one that is so great that it is all we can think about, which is much like Atlas of the ancient Greek myth. Giant weight of the world upon our shoulders, and here we're quite literally consciousness and the mind holding the entire physical realm, its metaphysical shoulders. That has been a long video, but again it will make the other 10 cards a lot easier to explain, because I can just reference back to this video if you don't understand what I'm talking about in those videos. But thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you're all having a great morning, evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are across the world, and may peace be with you all. Goodbye.